Hello. Well, we made it to Thursday. This is one of the more analytical, critical days. So I have the Thursday folder open, as you can see on the screen. I'm going to start with the word of the day, pariah. And what we have here, basically, is a state of being, way of looking at it. A pariah is an outcast from society. This can be self-inflicted, or it can be that society has kicked out an individual. But a pariah is an unperson. I found that online. I like that wording. Unperson. Somebody who's lost all title and lost all definition as an individual. Okay? Someone who's despised. You can treat others as a pariah. So in this example I found online, there's a rabbi who's dealing with one of his parishioners. Basically, the character finds himself feeling as if he were a pariah with no home, no family, and no community. He's totally isolated himself. And the rabbi himself says, what do you say when someone shares such self-loathing feelings? I mean, how do you help a person in this predicament? So it's an interesting view of how an individual can control their own status in society. Okay, so this ties in with what we went over yesterday, but do keep in mind, society creates their own pariahs, as well as an individual can control themselves. They can exile themselves from society. Okay? Look for your characters where this condition happens. This is the one word I'm expecting that'll pop up in a lot of essays as we go along through this semester. This is a key term that's important to use, especially when we get into your other majors. Don't forget, this will apply to other majors. Okay, so that's the word of the day. Now, right here, I have 4 theories. Well, more than 4. 4 files related to theories. Nyman went over most of these with you. I'm just going to highlight some details here. I do expect you to go in here and read more in depth. But, for instance, with formalism, I want to tackle an important point about that specifically. Likewise, the gender, I want to make sure I highlight specific points. So this, the way I've arranged this, it starts out with the very simple to the very complex. Okay. So, biographical, the one to start out with, is the easiest one. Okay. It's similar in effect to like reader response, which Nyman went over with you. But in this case, let me make this bigger. Okay. Biographical is the simplest theory. You're basically looking at the author's life and how it influenced the writing. Okay? You gain an understanding through the events that are told to you about his or her life. Okay, so in this example I have here, there's the poet Philip Levine, and he has a poem called Belle Isle, 1949. He's using his history, his personal history of being the son of immigrants and working class, and how that influences the poem. Okay, a lot of his writing is about witnessing people of working class struggling with an immigrant status. Okay. Okay, so that's biographical. It's strictly facts based on the author's life. With formalist criticism, what I want you to be careful of, okay, I had a lot of students picking this last year, and they all did it wrong, okay? With formalism, you're looking at the form of the work and just the form of the work, the genre, and how it operates and how it follows the specifications and restrictions for the piece. Okay? What is the structure of the piece is what one should be asking themselves if they're going to use this. Okay? So you can look at grammar, you can look at syntax, you can look at meter, you can look at tropes. Okay? You're looking at all the elements that make the work function as the genre it's associated with. So if you look at a sonnet, okay, you're explaining to me how a Shakespeare sonnet meets the rhyme scheme, the meter, the theme, the imagery, the symbolism, the Renaissance philosophies. All those factor into the construction of that sonnet and what makes it a sonnet. 14 lines. Okay? What you're not looking at, the author is actually not important. I don't need to know the sonnet that I'm looking at. The sonnet that I'm examining is by William Shakespeare. In fact, I will only mention him once, and never again will I bring in William Shakespeare when discussing that sonnet under a formalist criticism. Okay? That was the first thing people always messed up. The second thing, because you're not talking about the author, their life is not important. This is the opposite of biographical examination. Okay? You will not look at the cultural impact of the author's life on the work. You will not look at the political beliefs of the author on the work. And frankly, and this is the one that students always messed up, the reader is not important in a formalist argument. I could care less what your reaction is to the poem. I could care less what the audience's reaction to the poem is. It's only about the poem itself, or the story itself, how it functions and its structure. So once you get over that little hurdle, this is an easy paper to write. All you're doing is proving to me that the poem that you're examining, you're saying it's a sonnet, and here's why. Here's how it functions as a sonnet. And you can discuss themes and how it affects society. But you will not say anything about the reader or anything about the author. Okay? So do go over the other pages that are available for formalism just to be sure you are on the right track. Now, with gender, keep in mind, gender is different than sex. Okay? When you say the sex of a child, that's the biological determinations. That's what happens when the baby's in the mother's womb and the DNA and all those factors in decide whether it's a boy or girl. That's sex. Gender, on the other hand, gender are attitudes and expectations that society places on the child. Gender, well, let me rephrase it. Society expects girls to be in pink, boys in blue. Girls play with dolls, boys play with trucks. That's gender expectations. Okay? So when you're doing a gender study, you're looking at characters and examining how they operate under those societal rules. Does the male figure follow a stereotypical standard expectation of a male? Or another way of looking at it, does he over use the expectation? Is he feeling inadequate and therefore he is pushing his masculinity on all the other characters? Okay? So that's what I mean by typical masculine or feminine traits. How do the characters operate within the schemes of gender, of society, within their stories? So, for instance, if you're doing Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, how much of those characters' actions are typical feminine traits? There's some good examinations that some of those characters, the female characters, are acting more or less with a unique perspective of what it's like to be feminine. And that's chiefly because the author is feminine. So in gender, you can't look at the author. You look at the author's gender, you look at the character's gender, you look at how that influences each other. So this becomes real complex. You look at how society affects the author, how the author affects the characters, so forth and so on. So another way of looking at this: in what ways is the patriarchy or the matriarchy, how is it presented in a particular work? Is the patriarchy shown as this evil force that's subjecting women? Or is the matriarchy shown as a loving, supporting system of the characters? Okay, and the answer can be either way. Can go either way. You determine the answer to these questions with evidence, with quotes and explanations. Okay. Really what it all comes down to, I have the word value highlighted here. It's about value, how the character values themselves through their gender. How does society value the character because of their gender? Okay? Feminism criticism is more about control and empowerment, and how women characters are fighting for control against a larger force in the society. Be careful with feminism. I'll have another conversation with you about feminism in a few days. That's another criticism theory that students misused. They made it too simple. So we'll get into that at a later date. Okay? So if you have questions about these three, do let me know. Okay. There's also mythic and historicism. I like these. Do read through it. If you have any questions about basically what mythic it means, what it entails, or what historicism entails, let me know. Historicism is going to be rather easy. It's basically looking at the history of the time period and how it impacts society, and how that society impacts the author, and how that affects the characters. So unlike formalism, the author and the reader are affected by the culture, and therefore you can talk about them in this particular case. But this involves a lot of research into the culture and the history of the time period. There's more research involved. This is less self-observation and more background research. Now, I love the first one here, the mythic, because you get to pick your archetype. What type of character is the protagonist? Is he like a warrior figure? Is he like a trickster? There it is, trickster. Is he like a shapeshifter? So this works really well with fantasy stories. It's kind of hard to avoid it. It works well with other modern contemporary fiction. So if you look at Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, Frodo and Bilbo, they are the hero. Ultimately, they are the hero's protagonists. The wizard would be a mentor or shapeshifter. Okay, Aragorn is the warrior. He's also considered the king, which I don't have up here. But if you examine the definitions in Google, they're actually very point on, and I like it. But these are the top. I've given you 15 here. These are the top 15. There are hundreds of these, really, if you look at it. And we keep playing with this as society develops over time. Some authors, like William Faulkner in The Sound of the Fury, he really liked this concept. He loved archetypes, and he uses it to his advantage. Okay, the modernists love archetypes. They love to play with archetypes. So look that over. Let me know what you think. We'll talk more. Psychoanalytical is my second favorite. Mainly because I'm always second-guessing people and students. What makes them do the things they do. Women tend to psychoanalyze more than men. And I'm not just saying that as a sexist commentary. Women tend to psychoanalyze more than men. So what we have here, basically, I always tie it into like a girlfriend, a partner type situation. Women tend to have expectations. So if you tell them you're going to call, if you're a male and you tell them you're going to call at 6:30 and you just casually forget, the female tends to examine the relationship really in depth to figure out why you haven't called at 6:30, whereas men tend to be more casual with this sort of thing. So with these papers, you're psychoanalyzing characters, determining why they do the things they do. You're looking at what they're obsessive about, what their human behavior is like. And so the things you're examining, based off of Freud theories, basically, are their desires, their fears, their needs. What are conflicts for these characters? Okay, so you are looking at basic concepts of sexual frustration, dream analysis, obsessions with death. That's one of the major ones. Sex and death are the two major ones. Okay. The sexual behavior that they present. Are they over flirtatious? Okay. Do they partake in premarital sex, or do they refrain from premarital sex? That sort of thing. I don't want to hit you too much with superego, id, and ego, or libido and id. So if you've taken psychology courses, they do play with this. So you can have fun with this. That's what I like. There's a lot of interesting theories you can develop about these characters just by psychoanalyzing them. Okay? And wrapping up with these three: sociological, Marxist, and queer theory. Okay. Sociological is looking more at class. Okay. It's looking more at the functions of the society around the character, the power relations around the character. So this is, in a sense, similar to feminism. But you're looking at the conditions of how the schools or the fashions are controlling the character, or not controlling the character. Always remember to flip the criteria. It's what it is and what it is not. You're looking at the society, basically. You're looking at the economic conditions, the political arena, the cultural issues. This is similar to New Historicism in the sense you got to do a lot of background research. There's a lot of reading involved with sociological. But on the other hand, if you really like examining society and examining the cultural viewpoints that construct it, this would be your avenue. I've had some people write good papers based on this. It's more political, whereas New Historicism is more historical facts. Okay. You can divide sociological theories into feminist and to Marxist. So don't forget that. It's a very broad concept. Now, as far as Marxism is concerned, you're looking at how the working class is being presented to you, how the upper class is being presented to you, how the elite class is being presented. A lot of British literature you can examine just on the structure of Marxism theories. Okay, they're always talking about the upper class and the lower class. They always bring class into these novels, like Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence or Ian Foster's novels. He's always bringing up a struggle between the classes. Now, queer theory can be difficult. Be careful if you want to tackle this one. You're examining why a character is presented as the sexual orientation that they've chosen. Is it based on gender? Is it based on society? Is it based on their self-evaluation? That's the sort of logic you're going. Are they repressing desires for the same sex? Characters are often seen frustratingly confused. Okay? And an author may not necessarily have it in mind to present the character that way. That's where this gets a little dangerous. You got to be careful with this. But for instance, in Edgar Allan Poe stories, the central male protagonist often has these strange obsessions with another man. He really wants to murder another man in a very passionate, controlling sort of fashion. So, I mean, it becomes an interesting study. Okay? It's called Queering the Text. So if you do want to tackle this one, let me know. I can explain it to you more in depth if necessary. Okay? So here are some random examples. But for instance, the many antagonists, male and or female, they're always unmarried and single. Like the Joker. It's only recently that they've sort of shifted the Joker into a more sexual being, in a more psychologically damaging sexual being, and that's just within the last 10 years. But these other, the Minotaur, Grendel, and Humbaba, are strictly single monsters like figures. So but these are the type of questions you ask yourself. Okay. Let's see. So those are the theories. Today there's no exercise. Mainly the point for today is you go back, you examine these closer detail. Read through them. Okay? Decide which ones of these you like. The ones you like to use. We'll talk more about that again. We'll talk more about your selection process again. Okay. If you have any questions, you notice I left off deconstructionism. If you're a big fan of deconstructionism, come talk to me. But again, these aren't the end all of criticisms. They're just the top ones I want you to examine carefully. Okay? So that's it for today. Have a good Thursday. I'll see you tomorrow.